Here's the deal. I don't think Baker Mayfield and the Buccaneers are ready for what the Vikings defense is going to throw at them. Let's see if David Harrison of Locked On Bucks has anything to say about that. Welcome to Crossover Thursday on the Locked On Podcast.
You like that on 3, 1, 2, 3, you like it!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Vikings fans, Buccaneers fans? It is Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. This Crossover Thursday episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. This is a tradition for those new to the network that we have been doing here on the Locked On Network for years, where I, of Locked On Vikings, Luke Brunt, will talk to David Harrison of Locked On Bucks in advance of the Week 1 matchup at US Bank Stadium. So I guess we kind of start with the big headlines. So in Tampa Bay, what don't I know about as a fan of just the Vikings and kind of I barely pay attention to other teams around the league?
I mean, the biggest story going on in Tampa right now, honestly, is circulating around wide receiver Mike Evans, who's playing this year on an expiring contract. He has 9 straight 1,000-yard receiving seasons
Right.
coming into this season. The only NFL receiver in history to ever have 9 in a row to start an NFL career. And now there's this crossroads where Mike Evans' agent is very publicly telling people, we've been trying to get a new deal done with the Buccaneers for however long. They're not meeting us halfway. They're not meeting our demands. They're not willing to pay Mike what he's worth. And so he's probably going to making threats of this is going to be his last season in Tampa, and he's going to take his talents elsewhere and all this other stuff. And it's just when you have a team that is coming off the heels of the quote unquote Brady era, it was only 3 years, but in Buccaneers history, that's an era. On top of that, you've got all kinds of turmoil as far as is the offensive line going to be any good? Is Todd Bowles on the hot seat? Get a new offensive coordinator. Like the cap situation is straining everything. There's just a lot of drama kind of going on around this team. And then, oh, by the way, everybody expects them to be one of the worst teams in the NFL at the same time. So the question is really going to be is, while Mike Evans and his agents say if there's not a deal in place by, say, Sunday morning, Saturday night, he's just moving on and focusing on football. Okay. But when your future is up in the air like this, and if you are truly feeling disrespected by a franchise you've done all this great stuff for, are you really going to be able to be focused on just football? And if you, one of the team leaders, stars of this franchise, are not completely locked into this game, is everybody else going to be locked in the game too? Because Luke, this leaders, you set the pace. So if Mike Evans is distracted even one inch, that could trickle down to the rest of the team.
Yeah, I mean, that is sort of a moment that the Vikings have gone through for the last couple of years. And maybe that's where we are at right now, is that a lot of our legacy veterans are Eric Kendrickses and Anthony Barrs and Dalvin Cook and all of these guys, Thielen, that have been with the team for a decade or almost a decade, or in some cases more than a decade, leaving, going to other places. So we are sort of entering this new unknown chapter headlined by Brian Flores. And I want to ask some stuff to you later about Baker Mayfield and that offensive line and protection and blitzes and all that stuff, because the Vikings are a blitz heavy team now. The defense that they were before was this soft Fangio style, back it up, try to keep everything in front of you. It was a catastrophe. And they've just gone completely to the other side of the spectrum and said, F it, we're blitzing 45% of the time. Going into that, we're also kind of on Justin Jefferson contract watch, but I don't think that has a lot of bearing on the actual Buccaneers game. That's sort of something handled upstairs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So my question, I guess, and I think this is the biggest factor of this, is how does Baker Mayfield handle that?
That's going to be the big question. You know what I mean? He had a pretty solid preseason outing, and early on, and honestly, Coach Bowles even talked about this early on in training camp. It almost looked like Kyle Trask was kind of was maybe taking a little bit of a lead in the quarterback competition, but then you come out for the preseason, and in that first preseason game, Baker Mayfield just looked far and away the better quarterback for the team. And I think that kind of brought everybody back to where we were originally when it was first announced that this was going to be a competition, quote unquote, where everybody kind of said, well, Baker's got the intangibles. He's got the arm. He's got everything that you kind of want. And honestly, a little bit of the attitude. Like when you're leading an underdog team, you kind of need an underdog type of quarterback. You need a quarterback who's not going to care about the reputation, not going to care what everybody else says. And Baker Mayfield, he's proven a lot of things, I think, during his career, but the biggest thing he's proven is that he does not care what anybody else thinks about him or his squad. He's going to go out there and play his kind of game, and that can be kind of dangerous. Bucs fans know dangerous chip on their shoulder quarterbacks, going back to Jameis Winston, but it can also be very exciting. And I think this kind of a team, you really kind of need that type of leader. So I think he's the right guy. Whether it's going to, I think there's going to be hold on to your seat moments of excitement, and then there's going to be hold on to your seat moments of despair. You know what I mean? A little bit like Jameis Winston, but hopefully not as turnover happy as the days of Jameis Winston.
It's super cool. This is kind of a mirror matchup on defense a little bit, like stylistically with Todd Bowles. And I know he's backed off the blitz a little bit in the last year. He's not quite as insane as he was in like the Super Bowl year. It was crazy. But it's a little bit of, hey, these two teams, we got guys we want to man up. We're going to blitz a lot. We're going to put pressure on the quarterback. And hey, if you pick up the blitz, our corners might get exposed. And I think with the Bucs, when they won the Super Bowl, those corners were good enough not to get exposed. And that really made the whole thing ascend to a new level. But if we have bad corners, they'll get exposed. And it's kind of cool to kick off the season with two defenses that are going to be like this. I've been saying for a long time that the Vikings season is going to be exactly the same way with ups and downs. And there's going to be moments where you give up, 25 points in a quarter. And then there's going to be games where you are close to shutting them out.
No, absolutely. It definitely feels like a game that can kind of go either way, depending on a couple of breaks and depending, like you said, which team can pick up the blitz better. Because Todd Bowles has maybe in recent times kind of blitzed a little bit less. I think some of that is due to the fact that even when he brings the blitz packages, so they're just not getting home, and that's something that this team has been trying to get better on for the last 2 years, is getting an organic pass rush. Because if your organic pass rush is solid, then anytime you blitz is just going to make it even better. But if you have to blitz just to get a standard, amount of pressure on a quarterback, that's never going to be a good thing. And as much as we love, and as much as Todd Bowles loves Vita Vea, his nose tackle, if your nose tackle is leading your team in sacks, that's a big, big problem unless he's getting 13, 15 somehow sacks. And that's not the case. Vita Vea 6.5 sacks last year, but leading the team. So that's something that they're working on this year. And that's going to hinge a lot on who's available for this game, I think. But if Todd Bowles has the opportunity to, just like you said, he's going to ramp up the pressure. So I think regardless of who comes out on top of this game, Bucs fans, Vikings fans, NFL fans who don't have anything better to watch because their team already played Thursday or plays later, you're going to have a very entertaining game of watching offensive linemen either take a lot of running start defenders to the chest, or a lot of quarterbacks running for their lives.
Exactly. Speaking of Vita Vea and quarterbacks running for their lives, there's a matchup that I think I want to ask you about. One that I think you're going to be a fan of this one. So that's going to be what comes up next, as well as some kind of keys to the game stuff that we will talk about a little bit later, right after we talk to you a little more about PrizePicks.
Yeah, because this crossover Thursday episode of Locked On Vikings, Locked On Bucs is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in North America. PrizePicks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports, DFS. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks like Luke Braun, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 players, stat projections, and watch the winnings roll in. Testing my skills on PrizePicks this football season is the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. And PrizePicks now offers Apple Pay for quick and easy deposits into your account this football season. If you are an iPhone user, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL or the promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Daily fantasy sports made easy with PrizePicks.
Thank y'all so much for making Locked On Vikings or Locked On Bucs your first listen of the day, whichever one you are coming from. FYI, in these podcast feeds and also on the Locked On NFL feed, we've got the ultimate NFL preview. So I got together with all the NFC North guys. David got together with everyone from the NFC South and previewed our divisions and seasons by answering a number of questions like, who's the best quarterback in the division? What about a team that didn't make the playoffs that might this year? Lots of fun debate. And it's this really big produced thing. Like whenever the Locked On network does an ultimate something you got to tune in. But let's hone in on a couple of these matchups. You intrigued me. Now I gotta ask, what's this? What are you doing about Justin Jefferson? What is the Bucs plan? This is going to be a question
Yeah,
for me every single one of these crossovers. What's your plan for JJ?
right. I mean, that's got to be the first question every defense answers, right? Coming into this
Exactly.
matchup, and then oh, by the way, you got a young fellow over there looking to take advantage of you spending so much time, focusing on Jefferson. I mean,
Mhm.
bottom line is like, you're not going to keep a player like this from impacting the game. The question is, how much of an impact is he going to make? Because this is a guy that can really get things rolling for the team. And, momentum is a dangerous thing in any sport, but the NFL, especially in the way the defenders operate. I think Carlton Davis specifically against Jefferson, that is the matchup that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have to win. But you can't expect to win it with just Carlton Davis. Like, I think at the end of the day, Carlton Davis, I think, is a legit cornerback, a very good cornerback in his own right. But I think everybody has to kind of understand what his limitations are and how to best address them, because Carlton Davis, when he starts getting beat, he gets very grabby in the past. And,
Hmm.
and officials have already kind of proven they're not going to let CD3 get away with all that grabbiness. And when you got opening week in the NFL, they want big plays, they want highlights. So if you're over there holding on to Jefferson's jersey, they're going to throw some flags at you, and they're not going to let you do that. So the key to that is a guy like Antoine Winfield Jr., who last year had to play in the box a lot, but this year he's going to get to play a little bit off. He's going to get to play a little bit more safety. And I think that he's going to be able to show his pass coverage ability as much this year as he was able to show his kind of run stopping and his box supporting ability last year. And I think that Todd Bowles, going back to the whole blitzing thing, he's still going to use Antoine in that role. But I think in key situations, you want to put two of your best defenders on their best receiver and force the other guy to prove that he's someone that needs to be reckoned with too. And until the Vikings prove that that the Buccaneers have to focus somewhere else, I think that's the way you do it. Hopefully, Todd Bowles remembers the first time he played against Tyreek Hill. I know they're not the same type of receivers, but they're both receivers that can really do a lot of damage against your defense if you're not smart about how you cover them. Tyreek Hill destroyed the Buccaneers for about a quarter and a half. After that, they got smart and they did better. And then the Super Bowl later that year, they were smart again and did better. Don't make Jefferson teach you that lesson in the beginning. Just come in understanding this is how you need to handle things, and hopefully it works out.
Yeah, there's the pick your poison the Vikings at least are trying to present here, because they're really, really excited about Jordan Addison opposite
Right.
Justin Jefferson. And of course, TJ Hawkinson as well just got that big payday, kind of because last year he was wide receiver too. He was the second receiving option. If you double Jefferson, he was going to be one-on-one on the backside, and they got 100-yard games out of him that way. And so that's sort of the pick your poison is what is a greater impact? Is it Justin Jefferson getting 120 yards, or is it Justin Jefferson getting double teamed all day and everybody else gets 120 yards?
Yeah.
And what kind of game do you want to actually play? Here's a matchup that I think I'm a little bit more concerned about, because ultimately with like Carlton Davis, if he's a physical corner, you might want to shadow him on Addison, who's smaller and struggled with that in college. But with the trenches, Vita Vea, you talked about him earlier. We fear Vita Vea on Garrett Bradbury. He's a smaller center. All centers are smaller. And finding a way to keep that from becoming a one-on-one, I think, is going to be a big cat and mouse game between Todd Bowles and Kevin O'Connell, but I think more specifically Chris Cooper, who's the O-line coach and works a lot on the run game. Speaking of trying to get double teams or break up double teams, is this going to be a 12 personnel kind of vibe, or is this going to be an 11 personnel kind of vibe? Because if the Vikings get to use their base personnel, they're a 3-4 team, which means they get to put 5 guys on the line of scrimmage, which means it's harder to get double teams. And then you can get, Harrison Phillips one-on-one with somebody, with a rookie, right? Or whoever's on that offensive line. So I guess I kind of wanted to kick that over to you. What kind of offensive personnel are the Buccaneers looking to base out of? And that probably determines who you guys are going to see on the defensive side.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are expecting a lot of 12. You know what I mean? And some of that is personnel, honestly. You know what I mean? Like, you look at the Buccaneers, and I think a lot of us also expected them to go after a legitimate number 2 running back, and instead they go with a veteran Chase Edmonds. They keep Keyshawn Vaughn, who really hasn't proven a whole lot outside of a few flashes during his career so far. And then they go get undrafted free agent running back out of Syracuse, Sean Tucker, who now is unofficially listed as their number 2 running back. And while that's great for him, it also kind of shows you what they brought into the season behind Rashad White. So if you really are putting a lot of your eggs in one running back basket, that kind of shows that you're going to do things that you think are going to make him successful without him having to do a lot of work on his own, because that's only going to make him wear down a lot faster. And then you have guys like Ko Kieft, Payne Durham, and David Wells in the tight end group, who mostly you've got receiving talent, right? But Ko Kieft is more of your blocking type of tight end. And I think that he's a guy that they can bring in and force that Minnesota Vikings defensive line to work a little bit more and not be able to take advantage of some of these advantageous matchups that you're going to have with essentially a piecemeal offensive line that the Buccaneers are bringing, which is the best way I can describe them until we see enough of them to start having some confidence in them. You know, the coaches are saying all the right things, but the bottom line is you got 5 new starters. Well, I guess really 4 new starters with Robert Hainsey as the starting center now, with Ryan Jensen on IR. But with Tristan Wirfs moving over to the left side, you got a brand new left tackle who sure could be all pro caliber. Hopefully he's going to be all pro caliber, but it's not proven yet. So outside of the center, you don't really have any proven track records for what you have on the offensive line. So this Minnesota Vikings defense is literally going to be the first real test that this offensive line is going to face. So having 2 tight ends in there to help them from a matchup standpoint, but also from a blocking standpoint. K. Dotton is more of a receiver than blocker, but I think he can hold his own to a certain extent if he's helping someone, not taking someone on one-on-one.
And I truly think that's where this game is decided, is going to be on that side of the trenches. Brian Flores is going to bring a whole bunch of blitzes. Can you set your protections and get him picked up and survive, right? Just survive. Or can, we get to our hots and stuff like that. I want to go a little deeper into that, especially on the offensive line with you, right after we talk a little bit about LinkedIn.
Yeah, this crossover Thursday episode, Locked On Bucks, Locked On Vikings, also brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business, so you want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Once you post your job, add the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you are indeed hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience, so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rank LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. So post your job opening for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
So let's get down to brass tacks here and talk about what these teams need to do to secure the win. And I want to start with the Buccaneers. And my opinion on this, just knowing what is coming to the Buccaneers, is that O-line needs to hold up. But with Tristan Wirfs moving over, with rookie, with a whole bunch of sort of question marks over there, my question then becomes, when there is pressure, what happens? And my understanding of Baker Mayfield is that he's sort of learned to dump the ball off. Is that something? I mean, so then my question becomes, who are the yak guys? Who are the checkdowns that can really hurt you in the flat, and punish those blitzes? Or if that isn't the case, how do the Buccaneers plan to punish all out zero blitz?
Yeah, that's going to be the biggest question, I think, for this Tampa Bay Buccaneers team to answer all season long. You know what I mean? Because again, if we're not the only ones seeing this offensive line that basically is just kind of being pieced together as they're going, and every opponent knows that if you can keep your team, your opponent's weakness from becoming a confidence, then that's kind of your fastest way to get a victory. So the more they can exploit the offensive line, the better off that they'll be. So from there, it's on the quarterback, like you mentioned, Baker Mayfield, making smart, quick decisions when he needs to. But also, it's on Dave Canales to scheme up either quick passing games, screens, what have you, and ways to kind of take advantage of these opportunities without getting so one-dimensional that the Vikings essentially just know every play that's happening, like they're on the other side of the huddle. I think the trick is going to be for Dave Canales to find an offensive blend that doesn't allow the Minnesota Vikings to just say, okay, hey, we already know what you're about to do before you snap the ball, but also allows his offense to play fast. Because if guys start having to think too much, or guys start playing tentative because they're lacking confidence or not sure what they're doing, or if it's going to be successful, I think that's where you're going to see any team just implode on top of itself. Mike Evans is not known as a big yak guy. So obviously, if you throw the ball to him 6 yards downfield, he's probably going to get 6 yards, maybe 7 if he can fall forward. Chris Godwin's a little bit better. Trey Palmer is a young rookie that looks exciting and has some potential. Devin Tompkins is probably the shiftiest guy on the field, but he's also largely unproven. And that's really kind of what makes the beginning part of this season hard from a Tampa Bay Buccaneers standpoint, because you've got two known commodities in Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, but you also know that they can't throw the ball to themselves, right? So the quarterback has to be able to do his thing, and we don't know what Baker Mayfield is going to look like if this offensive line is under a lot of pressure, which the offensive line is something we don't have a lot of evidence on. The young receivers behind Godwin and Evans are unproven, and the running backs behind Rachaad White are unproven. Rachaad White himself, not exactly coming off of a 1,200-yard rushing performance, looked solid at the back end of the season, sure, but how is he going to perform as the number one guy? So there's just a lot of, if you had to write down the Buccaneers depth chart from an accuracy standpoint, you're writing question marks all over the formation, all over the field. And that really makes it hard to fully predict what the Buccaneers are going to do. You can look at the Seahawks just a little bit. And I think if you look at the Seahawks, you see a lot of trying to set up the run, trying to get the running game going so that you can free up your quarterback and a lot of moving the pocket. I think Baker Mayfield's maybe a little bit underrated mobility, or I wouldn't call him a running quarterback, but more mobile than a lot of quarterbacks. I think it's going to help him as well. He always as long as he doesn't, again, just kind of go. I think everybody who covers the Bucs has a little bit of Jameis Winston PTSD in him, but as long as he's not running backwards for 20-yard sacks, you know what I mean? Then you keep the play alive. But smart play by the quarterback, smart play calling by the coordinator. Because if things don't go well early and you start calling things that your formation's not comfortable in, they can't play fast. If they're not playing fast, it's not going to go well.
Exactly. And I think it's kind of on the same side of the ball for me in terms of the thing the Vikings need to do to win this game is they need to tackle. They need to tackle properly in these situations where the ball has been dumped off. This is going to be a game that I think is decided at some point on a 3rd and long for the Buccaneers. At some point they'll be in a 3rd and 10 or worse, and the Vikings will send a big blitz, and the game will swing on that play if the Bucs get out of it and score. That's the way I feel like this game goes. Or it ends up in a sack, or it ends up in a check down and we come down and we tackle and they're punting and then that was that. I think that's where it comes down to, like in these matchups where it feels like there's kind of strength on the other side of the ball, where you know Justin Jefferson in this first round, Addison, and don't forget KJ Osborne, who's no slouch, and this offense that's very, I'll say, intentionally constructed. It's very focused. There's a very clear idea of what they want to do, and they've been very efficient in terms of pursuing that. And I think of the same of the Bucs defense, and that it's studs up and down it, right? And I feel like when it's this strength on strength thing, that kind of cancels. And the Vikings will get their licks and the Bucs will get their licks, and everybody's going to kind of get some, and it's going to turn out to be a sort of okay performance. And it comes down to the volatile other side of the ball of, where everybody's got their question marks. And that's, I don't know, that does that track with you? That's where it feels like coming down to with me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think, when you, like you mentioned, when you have two really strong defenses and you have two really confident defenses, and then you have two offenses that might have some questions or might have some concerns, I think really what it boils down to is which team's known commodities are going to come through, right? Like you could have a wild card, maybe it's Jordan Addison, maybe it's Ryan Neal, the new Buccaneers safety. Like you could have one of these newcomers or a rookie out there, just kind of play with his hair on fire. But I think most of the time when you see teams with some question marks on them, it's the known guys that set the table, and maybe the unknown hits, knocks it over the edge, but it's the known guys that set the table. So how do Mike Evans and Justin Jefferson carry their team, and how do on the defense side of the ball, how does a guy like Levante David make sure that his unit stays glued together? And I think Devin White on TJ Hawkinson, he's not going to be the only one that covers TJ, but the reps where Devin White does cover TJ, I think that's going to be a big one. And if I'm Kirk Cousins, you know what I mean? I'm looking to see, can 45 stick with my tight end? Because if he can't, I'm going to exploit it all day long. You already kind of mentioned it. You know what I mean?
Right.
But if those known commodities falter, then the unknowns really almost don't have a chance to become a hero for the day. But as long as those known guys are doing what they need to do, then that's where you can kind of get these unexpected heroes in the game. And I think that's, to me, especially early in the season, that's where teams like this have to live in order to build for the future.
For sure. So wrapping all of that up, the Vikings are favored by 6 at home on FanDuel. What do you think happens here? Do they cover? Don't they? Give me a score if you want.
Yeah, so I think that it's going to be a fairly close game. I think obviously, to me, the bottom line is you would rather have, TJ Hawkinson go for 120 than Justin Jefferson, because TJ Hawkinson getting 120 is going to take a lot more to do it. And you know what? You might give up 45 on one drive and then you force a punt or maybe a missed field goal if you get lucky, and things like that. But if you give up 45 on a drive to Justin Jefferson, you're probably giving up a close field goal or a touchdown at the same time. So I think that, the similar stat lines don't necessarily weigh the same as far as quality of production for the Vikings. So I think if you're the Buccaneers, you got to look to keep Jefferson bottled up as much as possible. And then again, rely on some of your veterans and some of your guys who've been around in the Todd Bowles defense. They're getting their, 80th week of installs in a Todd Bowles defense. You need to know what you're supposed to do, how you're supposed to do it, to go out there and execute your job. And then hopefully a newcomer like a Ryan Neal, maybe an underdog like a Zion McCollum, who's not getting a lot of love in Tampa these days, comes up with a fluke big play and kind of seals the deal. But I think when you look at the two teams, question marks on both sides of the ball. Certainly it's a new year. That's always going to be the case. But I think the Vikings probably feel a little bit more comfortable in their known commodities than the Buccaneers do, mainly because the quarterback is so new and the offense coordinator is new in Tampa. And how's that marriage going to work so early on? So I do think that the Vikings pull this one out. I don't think they cover the spread. I think it's about a 4-point game, probably looking low 20s, high teens for the losing team. And I think it's a mostly defensive battle with, like you said, a few plays, and then late in the game, maybe a 3rd and 12. And if it's converted, you got an opportunity. But if it's not, then that's the ball game.
Yeah, it's like one of these third quarter moments that doesn't feel like, the game really hinged on that play, like, it was a 4th and 20 at the end of the game or anything like that. But I do feel like that's where the key to this one comes. I am feeling a little more bullish. And some of it is based on the conversation we just had here. It feels like there are a lot of pressure points around which the Bucs can fall apart. And
it's a good way of putting it.
The blitz heavy, let's send to 8 kind of cover 0 thing is meant to find those pressure points, to find that loose string and pull on it and see what unravels. I can absolutely see this one getting out of hand. Now, like I said at the outset, I can see a whole range of outcomes. I can see this getting out of hand for the Vikings too, who are feeling a little full of themselves maybe after a solid idea of camp. And I think there's a lot of positivity around the team. They were just 13-4 and they know that was fake and they're ready to go prove that they can go do it again, and 1 or 2 punches in the mouth and suddenly you start feeling like the headlines wear on you. Right. So I could see it, but I think if I'm going to predict it, I'm going to make a call that the Vikings win and cover here. But if you want to listen to more in-depth breakdowns from David and from me, you can come, of course, find Locked On Bucs and Locked On Vikings. You can find the ultimate NFL preview, at least for me. I don't know what's going on your show this week, but for me, I've done like comprehensive breakdowns of the Vikings offense on Monday and the Vikings defense on Wednesday. So if you really want to go scout, you can go listen to that. I don't know what you've got going on, David, but there's a lot of content out there if you guys are interested.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We're doing a lot of dives into what the roster looks like, where those questions, like we talked about, where those questions are, but also where the strong points are. And then Evan Klosky, WTSP Wednesday. That's our episode right before this one, and he always comes through. Our guy there in 10 Tampa Bay always comes through with a lot of gems. And then we've got a live Saturday pregame special episode that we're doing for week 1 as well.
Excellent stuff. For David Harrison, this is Luke Braun signing off for Crossover Thursday on a Locked On NFL Podcast Network.